Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished scrubbing the last panel in cell block 6. The ICS Retribution hummed around him, a constant reminder that he was floating through the void aboard humanity's most secure prison vessel. For 3 years, he'd worked these corridors, and the routine had become second nature: clean, sanitize, maintain, repeat. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough to send money back to his sister on Earth, and that was all that mattered. Chun. Report to cell block 7, came the crackling voice through his comm unit. Marcus frowned. Block 7 had been sealed off for months, undergoing what the supervisors called special modifications. He'd assumed it was another corporate upgrade: better security systems, improved containment protocols, the usual improvements that came with housing the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. The security checkpoint to Block 7 required 3 different scans: retinal, palm print, and DNA swab. Marcus had never needed this level of clearance before. The security officer, a stern woman named Vasquez, handed him a modified toolkit and a data pad with his assignment parameters. New prisoner. Arrives in 6 hours, she said curtly. Standard decontamination protocol, but listen carefully: minimal exposure time. This one's classified as extremely hazardous. In and out, no lingering, no curiosity. You see something strange, you report it immediately and exit the block. Marcus nodded, scrolling through the sparse briefing file. The prisoner was listed only as Subject X7, described as an alien terrorist responsible for attacks on civilian populations across 3 star systems. The species designation was blank, and the threat assessment was marked in red. Maximum danger, lethal capabilities ... as he made his way through the reinforced corridors of Block 7. Marcus noticed the differences immediately. The walls were lined with some kind of energy-dampening material that made his skin tingle, and the air recycling system hummed with a different frequency. Whatever or whoever was coming here, the corporation had spared no expense in containing it. The cell itself was a marvel of engineering, with reinforced transparent aluminum walls, multiple force field generators, and what appeared to be some kind of biosuppression field that cast everything in a pale blue glow. Marcus began his work methodically, running decontamination fields over every surface, checking life support calibrations, and ensuring the feeding mechanism was properly sterilized. He was halfway through when he heard footsteps echoing down the corridor, heavy boots accompanied by the whir of repulsor lifts. They were bringing the prisoner in early. Marcus quickly gathered his equipment, but as he turned to leave, curiosity got the better of him. Through the observation panel, he caught his first glimpse of Subject X-7. She wasn't what he expected. At all, the figure being led into the cell was humanoid, but clearly alien, with elongated limbs and features that seemed almost ethereal. But what stopped Marcus cold wasn't her appearance. It was her skin. Soft patterns of light pulsed beneath its surface, like living constellations that shifted and flowed with each movement. Even through the biosuppression field, the luminescence was mesmerizing, creating patterns that seemed almost communicative. As the guards secured her restraints and activated the containment protocols, Marcus found himself unable to look away. This was supposed to be a monster, a terrorist who had killed countless innocents. But watching her move, seeing the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite her chains, he felt something he'd never experienced in 3 years of working with prisoners. Doubt. The next morning, Marcus returned to Block 7 with his standard maintenance kit, telling himself he was just doing his job. The prisoner, he still couldn't think of her as Subject X7, sat motionless in the center of her cell, her bioluminescent patterns dim, but still visible beneath her pale skin. The moment he entered the observation area, her head turned toward him with an alertness that made his breath catch. Their eyes met through the transparent barrier, and Marcus felt a jolt of recognition that defied explanation. Her eyes were large and golden, with an intelligence that seemed to peer directly into his soul. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, she raised one shackled hand and placed it against the wall of her cell. Marcus found himself stepping closer, drawn by an impulse he couldn't name. The feeding slot was due for its weekly deep clean, a process that required him to open the security panel and work directly adjacent to the cell wall. As he began his work, he became acutely aware of her presence just meters away. "I know you can understand me," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a violation of protocol, but something about her stillness invited communication. "I'm Marcus. I maintain this section." The response was immediate and unexpected. The light patterns beneath her skin shifted, flowing in waves from her core to her extremities, then back again. It was beautiful, like watching Aurora Borealis dance beneath living tissue. More than that, it felt intentional, a response, a greeting perhaps. Over the following days, Marcus found excuses to spend more time in Block 7. Each interaction brought new discoveries. When he spoke, her light patterns changed in what seemed like direct response to his words. When he laughed at something, a joke he'd heard from another maintenance worker, her luminescence took on warmer hues. When he mentioned his sister's illness back on Earth, the patterns became subdued, almost sympathetic. The breakthrough came during his 4th visit. As he worked on calibrating the cell's atmospheric controls, he began humming an old Earth song. His mother used to sing a lullaby about stars and distant homes. The prisoner's reaction was immediate and profound. Her entire body lit up with cascading patterns of gold and silver, so bright they penetrated even the biosuppression field. But more than that, she began to move her hands in rhythm with the melody, creating what could only be described as a dance of light. When the song ended, Marcus realized he was crying. The beauty of what he'd witnessed was overwhelming, but beneath it lay a terrible understanding. This wasn't the behavior of a terrorist or a monster. This was someone responding to beauty with beauty, someone who understood music and emotion and the longing for home. "What did they do to you?" he whispered. Her light patterns shifted again, this time taking on deep blues and purples that seemed to pulse with sorrow. She moved to the wall again, pressing both hands against it, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was musical, melodic in a way that suggested her species communicated as much through tone as through words. "Luminari," she said, the word carrying layers of meaning Marcus couldn't fully grasp. Then, pointing to herself, "Lyra." The name hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't Subject X7 or an anonymous terrorist. She was Lyra, and she belonged to a people called the Luminari. As he repeated her name, her bioluminescence brightened with what he could only interpret as joy, the first positive emotion he'd seen from her since her arrival. That night, Marcus lay awake in his quarters, unable to shake the image of Lyra's light patterns or the sound of her voice saying her own name. For the first time since joining the Retribution's crew, he began to question what he was really part of. Marcus's research began innocuously enough. Using his maintenance access codes, he pulled up the technical specifications for Block 7's specialized containment systems. What he found made his blood run cold. The biosuppression field wasn't just containing Lyra, it was slowly draining her bioluminescent capabilities, harvesting the energy and storing it in containment cells deep within the ship's research sector. Digging deeper into files he technically had no business accessing, Marcus discovered references to Project Starlight, a classified research initiative studying unique xenobiological properties for potential military applications. The corporate sponsor wasn't the prison system at all, but Nexus Corporation, one of the galaxy's largest military contractors. The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. Lyra wasn't a prisoner serving a sentence. She was a test subject. His hands shaking, Marcus accessed the historical databases, searching for any reference to the luminary species. What he found was a single sanitized report buried in the Galactic. Incident Archives. Luminary homeworld lost to stellar collapse species, declared extinct. The date was 3 years ago, exactly when Nexus Corporation had announced a breakthrough in bioenergy research. Stellar collapse, Marcus muttered, reading the report again. Right. That evening, Marcus brought something different to Block 7, a small data pad loaded with historical archives, music files, and images from across the galaxy. It was strictly against protocol, but he needed to know more. When he showed Lyra images of various worlds and species, her reactions were muted. But when he played recordings of different musical traditions, her response was immediate and heartbreaking. A piece of traditional Altarian, choral music caused her bioluminescence to shift into complex geometric patterns that seemed to tell a story. An Earth symphony created flowing waves of light that suggested vast spaces and deep emotions. But when Marcus played a recording, he'd found buried in the cultural archives something labeled only as Luminary Ceremonial Song, Lyra's. Reaction was overwhelming. Light exploded from her skin in patterns so complex and beautiful that Marcus had to shield his eyes. She pressed both hands against the cell wall, her whole body trembling as waves of gold, silver, and deep blue cascaded across her form. When the song ended, she was weeping a sound that was more like music than crying, a melody of pure grief. "They're all gone, aren't they?" Marcus asked softly. Lyra nodded, and through gestures and the few words they'd managed to share, she began to tell him her story. The Luminari hadn't been destroyed by stellar collapse. They'd been systematically exterminated by Nexus Corporation mining operations. Her people's bioluminescence wasn't just beautiful. It was a living library, storing the memories, histories, and cultural knowledge of their entire civilization in patterns of light that could be passed down through generations. Nexus hadn't just committed genocide. They'd stolen the accumulated wisdom of an entire species, then covered up their crime by fabricating her terrorist activities. Lyra's supposed attacks had been desperate attempts to expose the truth, to preserve some fragment of her people's legacy before it was lost forever. As Marcus watched her light patterns shift through what he now understood were memories of her lost world, her family, her people's art and music and stories, he felt something fundamental change inside him. The comfortable routine of his life, the steady paycheck, the willful ignorance of what happened beyond his maintenance rounds. None of it mattered anymore. "I'm going to help you," he said, the words coming out before he'd fully processed the decision. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to get you out of here." Lyra's bioluminescence shifted to warm golds and whites hope, he realized. She was showing him hope. And for the first time in days, Marcus felt it too. Planning Lyra's escape required Marcus to become someone he'd never been before: a rebel, a thief, and potentially a traitor to his own species. Over the following weeks, he used his maintenance access to map every system in Block 7, identifying weaknesses in the containment protocols, and gathering intelligence on guard rotations and security procedures. The biggest challenge wasn't the technology, it was the location. The Retribution was 3 weeks out from the nearest inhabited system, floating in the void between stars. Even if he could free Lyra from her cell, there was nowhere to run. Escape pods had limited range, and the ship's shuttles were locked down tighter than the prison blocks themselves. The answer came from an unexpected source: Dr. Elena Vasquez, the same security officer who'd briefed him for his first assignment. In Block 7, Marcus had noticed her lingering near the block during shift changes, often staring at the security monitors with an expression he couldn't quite read. When she approached him during his lunch break, he nearly choked on his synthesized protein bar. "We need to talk," she said quietly, sliding into the seat across from him in the mess hall. "Somewhere private." They met in maintenance shaft C7, a cramped space between the ship's outer hull and the primary corridor. Vasquez activated a signal scrambler before speaking. "I know what you've been doing," she said. "The extended maintenance visits, the unauthorized data pad, the research. Into files you shouldn't have access to." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, but she held up a hand. "I'm not here to report you. I'm here because I've been conducting my own investigation." Vasquez had been with the Retribution for 7 years, long enough to notice patterns in the prisoners they housed. Too many aliens from recently extinct species, too many classified research projects, too many prisoners who disappeared into corporate custody instead of completing their sentences. "Project Starlight isn't the first," she explained. "There have been others. Project Deepwater, Project Stormfront, Project Nightfall. Each one targeting a different species with unique biological capabilities. The prison system is just a front. We're not corrections officers, Marcus. We're kidnappers working for corporate research." Her plan was ambitious and dangerous. The Retribution was scheduled to dock at Haven Station in 18 days for supplies and crew rotation. During the docking procedure, there would be a window, perhaps 30 minutes, when the ship's security systems would be focused externally rather than internally. If they could time it right, they could override Block 7's containment systems and get Lyra to one of the station's refugee processing centers before anyone realized she was gone. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "I have a daughter," she finally said. "She's about the same age as your friend down there. And I've been thinking about what kind of galaxy I'm helping to build for her future." The next 2 weeks were a carefully orchestrated dance of preparation. Marcus used his maintenance rounds to gradually disable non-critical security sensors, creating blind spots in the surveillance network. Vasquez used her security clearance to modify guard rotations and create confusion in the duty rosters. Together, they compiled evidence of the corporate conspiracy classified documents, research reports, and most damning of all, video recordings of Lyra's bioluminescent memory patterns that proved the luminary's peaceful nature. 3 days before they reached Haven Station, Marcus made his final visit to Block 7 as a maintenance worker. When he told Lyra about the plan, her light patterns shifted through every color he'd learned to recognize: fear, hope, gratitude, and something else. Something that looked like trust. "Whatever happens," he said, pressing his hand against the cell wall where hers waited on the other side, "you won't die in this cage. I promise you that." Her response was a cascade of warm golden light that seemed to wrap around him like an embrace. And in that moment, Marcus realized that somewhere between his first glimpse of her luminescent skin and this desperate plan to free her, he'd fallen in love, not just with Lyra, but with the possibility of being someone better than he'd ever imagined he could be. Haven Station materialized in the viewports, like a small city floating in space, its docking arms extending to embrace the Retribution in a carefully choreographed dance of magnetic grapples and pressurization seals. Marcus watched from the maintenance deck as the final connections locked into place, his heart pounding with the knowledge that everything they'd planned would succeed or fail in the next 30 minutes. Vasquez's voice crackled through his concealed COM unit, security protocols switching to external mode in 60 seconds, all teams in position. The plan unfolded with mechanical precision. Vasquez triggered a false alarm in the cargo hold that drew the majority of the security force away from the prison blocks. Marcus used the distraction to access Block 7's control room, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. The containment field generators powered down with a low hum, and for the first time in months, Lyra's bioluminescence blazed at full intensity. She was magnificent patterns of light cascading across her skin like living art, telling stories of her people that only she remembered. When the cell door slid open, she stepped out cautiously, as if hardly daring to believe she was free. "This way," Marcus whispered, leading her through the carefully mapped route they'd planned. The maintenance corridors were narrow and cramped, but they provided the only path to the docking bay that avoided the main security checkpoints. They were halfway there when the alarms began to wail. "Containment breach in Block 7, came the automated announcement. "All security personnel report to stations." "This is not a drill." Marcus grabbed Lyra's hand. Her skin was warm and seemed to pulse with life beneath his touch, and they ran. Behind them, he could hear the heavy footsteps of security teams mobilizing, the whir of tracking drones being deployed. Their window was closing fast. The docking bay was chaos when they arrived. Vasquez was already there, arguing loudly with a Haven Station customs official about some invented discrepancy in the cargo manifest, her performance keeping the area clear of other personnel. When she saw Marcus and Lyra, she nodded toward an open airlock. "Refugee transport leaves in 5 minutes," she said. "Elena Vasquez, recommending immediate asylum processing for this individual under Galactic Protection Protocol 7. The customs official looked confused, then noticed Lyra's bioluminescence. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Is she Luminari?" "But they're extinct." "Not extinct," Lyra spoke for the first time since her escape, her voice carrying that musical quality that made everyone who heard it stop and listen. "Murdered, but not extinct while I live." As if responding to her words, her skin erupted in the most complex pattern Marcus had ever seen, waves of light that seemed to show the history of her people, their art, their music, their love for their homeworld, and their final desperate flight from corporate destroyers. It was beautiful and terrible, and completely undeniable. The customs official stepped back, awed. "My God, you're a living archive." "The only one left," Lyra confirmed. "But these humans, they risk everything to preserve what remains." Security forces burst into the docking bay just as the refugee transport sealed its airlock. Through the viewport, Marcus could see Captain Morrison's face, twisted with rage, as he realized what had happened. But Haven Station had jurisdiction now, and Lyra was officially under their protection.